Guys, I'm Jim and this is Jim's Fix-It Shop, and today we're going to pull the front in this tube out of the rear case because I just noticed we got some movement here, and that's probably not a good sign. I know you have to have some play in there so the thing will turn, but this just looks a little excessive. So we got to do a couple of things before we can just pluck this out of here. Now some machines have just one wire going up to this ignition switch. And all that is, my machine did have. All that is a ground wire that kills the engine. This one has 4 wires coming up. One wire is an electrical wire that comes from the battery up to the switch. And then when you turn it to start, it sends 12 volts back to the solenoid, which kicks the solenoid in and sends the current to the starter. Now it's still all 12 volts, but the starter is going to pull a lot of amperage out of that battery to turn this engine over. And these little bitty wires that are coming up to this switch is not going to hold up to that much amperage, and it will melt the wires. That's why you need a solenoid. And we have to unhook the cable. Now this end is simpler to unhook because it's only one at this point. They did switch from 2-pedal machines to a 1-pedal machine, but there's still 2 cables in the case by the differential. One goes to the clutch, and if you push it in part way, it pulls the clutch. If you push it in all the way, there's it reminds me of a sinker that you crush on a line when you go fishing. They have that crushed on the cable, and when it pulls far enough, that part they have crushed on the cable grabs a loop in another cable and pulls that, and that applies the brake. So they still have 2 cables back there. They just went to 1 pedal and a very complex, probably expensive cable. So to get this off, you pull off your rubber pad that's on your pedal. Maybe I could get you a little closer so you could actually see this. Now get that pad pulled down. Now on your pedal, there's a hole and a slot. When the pad is on, it holds the cable down into that slot and it stays there. And you have a bunch of ferrules on here. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one has 5 that you can adjust the length of the cable by moving these either on this side of the pedal or on the front side of the pedal. They put them on there so when you put on a belt and you have to pull this tube in or out to tighten the belt, you can readjust the length of the cable by using those ferrules either on one side or the other pedal. So you just grab a hold of all of them and slide it up to the hole part, and the whole thing will slide right through the pedal. Then you want to pull the pad off. Now you want to stick this cable down through the tube and pull it out the back side, because when we pull this tube out, we don't want that cable getting caught on something. I'm going to try to drop the camera down so I can show you what I had to do to the wiring to get that loose, so I can pull the wire out with the tube, because I don't want to mess with this end. For one thing, the plug that snaps on the back of the ignition switch, it's larger than the hole that the wire is going through the tube, so I can't pull it that way. It's got to come out this way. So let me try to drop you down. Okay, I had 2 wires on this side and unhook. One is the kill wire that goes to this little insulated block that all the rest of the kill wires go to. Now these other wires are coming from your safety switches. So if any of them are in the wrong position, it shorts out the coil and it won't let the engine start. The other wire I had to unhook was the ground wire that hooks under the nut that bolts the engine to the rear case. That was 2 of them. On this side of the machine, I have the hot wire that goes up to the ignition switch, and you have the other wire that comes down and plugs into the solenoid that gives the solenoid current that closes the contacts. All that solenoid is an extremely heavy-duty switch that sends current from the battery to the starter. That's all they do. Now we got all that out of there. We're going to try to find this cable that's in here and pull it through. And that's that, with the little ferrules on the end. We'll stick that down there. And I believe everything else is unhooked. Now, so none of these ends get caught, I'm going to spin this around. Yeah, I'll tip you up a little bit. This hole up here where the wires come out, we're going to pull them up a little bit. They're caught on something now. We're going to pull that up so the end of the wires aren't hanging out of the end of the tube. So we don't want them to get caught on anything. And that's that. Now let's go back up. Now, I'm not going to mess with the clamp that goes around the tube. That's how you adjust your belt. And if I loosen this up, you can pull the tube out of the clamp. But it's going to scratch the paint all up, and I don't really want to do that. So we're going to take this piece of steel off of the rear case that goes into the clamp. Then I can pull it out. Now you want to check before you take any of this stuff loose. On this machine, down in the back, they have a piece of steel welded down there. So once I take this loose, the tube's not going to fall and hit the engine. My machine doesn't have that. So I have to put a board in here for it to go in and hit. So we can take these bolts out. Now it's going to be a little bit noisy because I'm getting lazy in my old age, and I'm going to use an impact. And we can take this plate off. And now we should be able to pull that tube right out of there. One last check to make sure I'm not going to catch anything. And let's try to lift her out. Well, that wasn't too bad. We're going to set it over. We'll set it over there. Well, that came out pretty nice. I really don't know if that's war or not. But I think I'm going to check on the price of a new one. Seeing I got it tore apart and it's out. And we're going to put a new one in. Now, if you have one of these machines and that tube is froze, I have a viewer that called me or emailed me, and I don't even remember what state he's in. I have so many emails, it's really hard to keep track. I think he was the one in Virginia. He said he bought a used snapper. The man he bought it from, his yard was like a golf course, nice and flat. That's not good, because when you just drive it on something flat all the time, this tube never gets a chance to turn, and they'll rust up, and his did. Now, this is Tim's. The one he had before this was the same design. It had a tube in here. Mine doesn't have that. It's a different design. It's designed like that one, like my model. His was froze up, and we had to get it unfroze. And I'll explain to you what we did in case you have that problem. Okay, there's the tube that's welded into the frame that your other tube goes inside of. What we had to do, we had to take the engine off, get it out of the way. We had to take the gas tank off. We took the seat off. Anything that's going to get hot and melt, we had to get out of the way. Of course, you had to take the battery out, and I believe we took all this wiring out of it, because you have to heat this with a torch. Now, this is inside of the frame, so what paint we did discolor from the heat never showed. The battery sits in front of it. There's a cover on this side with your push button to start it with, because that one was an older one. We just heated that up. I believe we took the back of the machine, we did leave the tires on, and we tied it to something solid. The bumper of your car, a tree, whatever you can get a hold of that's heavy and you're not going to move by pulling on it. Then you heat this tube up as evenly as you can all the way around, from both sides, front and the back, between this plate. And I just started pulling on the front end of it, not the handlebars. You'll break them. That's another point. When you're moving your machine around, don't push and pull on the handlebars. A lot of them are no longer available. You can't replace them if you bend or break them. So we just kept heating it up, and finally we started, with enough heat, we started melting this bushing. And it got pliable enough that it finally pulled out. Then we had to scrape this out because, of course, it was stuck to the tube from the heat. We did get it cleaned up, and we got a new one of these in there. And life is good again. Now, I did just happen to look at that tube and notice something. Let me spin this around. Okay, this is a part of the tube that was in the bushing. See all this rust on here? It got wet a few times, and that is what will freeze it up in that plastic bushing. Once this starts rusting to the point where you start getting scale, then the material is expanding and it's pinching inside that other pipe. That's where you come into problems. This has to be able to move. If this can't move in your rear case, you won't be able to tighten up your belt. I've seen videos online where guys have fixed these. They thought they fixed them by putting another piece of pipe over this and driving it into that piece of pipe. Well, now you can't tighten your belt up. I don't know what he plans on doing, but so you want to keep this as clean as possible. I'll have to buff all this rust off of here. And I think I might go with anti-seize lubricant. It's a little different than the anti-seize you put on nuts and bolts. I think that's what I'm going to smear all over this, because you know that stuff just gets everywhere. And Tim, if you're listening, if you get it on you, it ain't my fault. I had a viewer email me and said that I bought 2 snappers from an auction, because I knew I could get them running after I seen your videos. He says you do a great job, keep up the good work. And he says, by the way, it looks like you're having an awful lot of fun. Well, I do enjoy tearing these apart, especially when they're somebody else's and they're buying the parts. So I guess that's it on pulling that rear case apart, or pulling the tube out of the rear case. If you have any questions, comments, throw them in that box below, or email me at jimsfixitshop@gmail.com, and I'll do what I can to help you out. Until then, work safe, have fun, and we'll talk to you soon.